Hello, I'm so happy to be here with you. I've been wanting to read this book for a long time, and I'm really excited to finally do it. So, the name of the book is The Knight in the Rusty Armor. All I'm going to tell you is that if you are a first responder, you're going to want to listen. Let's get into it. The Knight in the Rusty Armor by Robert Fisher. Chapter 1: The Knight's Dilemma. Once, a long time ago, in a land far away, there lived a knight. He thought of himself as a good, kind, and loving. He did all the things that good, kind, and loving knights do. He fought knights who were bad, mean, and hateful. At the mere mention of a crusade, he would climb into his armor, mount his horse, and ride off in any direction. Sometimes he would ride off in several directions at the same time, which was no easy feat. The thing he liked to do best, however, was to rescue fair princesses in distress. In fact, when the knight business was slow, he had the annoying habit of rescuing them even if they didn't want to be rescued. So although the knight had many princesses who were grateful to him, he had just as many who were furious with him. This he took philosophically, after all. One can't please everybody. But what made this knight famous was his armor. It was given to him as a gift by the king and was made of a rare metal that shone as brightly as the sun itself. Some villagers would swear they had seen the sun rise or set in the east or north, when actually they had just seen this knight riding off in all directions. He loved putting on his armor and admiring the bright light it radiated. His wife Juliet and his son Christopher did not see much of him, for he was always putting on his armor and going to battle. Indeed, the knight loved his armor so much that after a while he didn't bother to take it off. He wore the armor at the dinner table, with friends, and even to bed. Eventually, there came a time when his family and friends forgot how he looked without his armor. Occasionally, Christopher would ask his mother, "What does Daddy really look like?" Then she would lead her son to the fireplace and point to a portrait of the knight. "There's your father," she would sigh. "Or at least, that's what he used to look like." One day, after 3 years of contemplating the portrait, Christopher said to his mother, "I wish I could see Daddy in person." "You can't have everything," snapped his mother. She was getting pretty upset with only that painting to remind her of his face. She wasn't getting much sleep either, because the knight would clank all night in his armor. One day she confronted the knight directly. "I think you love your armor more than you love me." "That's not true," insisted the knight. "Didn't I rescue you from that dragon and set you up in this classy castle?" "What you loved," said Juliet, peering through his visor so he could see his eyes, "was the idea of rescuing me. You didn't really love me then, and you don't really love me now." "I do love you," insisted the knight, hugging her and nearly breaking her ribs. "Then take off that tin suit so I can see who you really are," she demanded. "But I have to be ready to hop on my horse and ride off in all directions." "If you don't take that thing off, I'm getting on my horse and riding out of your life." This was a real blow to the knight. He didn't want Juliet to leave him. He loved his wife, his son, and his classy castle with its wall-to-wall stones. But he also loved his armor because it showed everyone who he was: a good, kind, and loving knight. He was astonished that his wife didn't also think he was good, kind, and loving. But if continuing to wear the armor meant losing Juliet and Christopher, he would remove it. The knight stood and reached up to remove his steel helmet. To his surprise, he discovered it wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, but still couldn't get it off. Dismayed, he tried to lift his visor, but it was stuck too. He tugged at it again and again with no success. The knight paced up and down in great agitation, wondering what to do. It was not surprising to find the helmet stuck because he hadn't removed it for a long time. The visor, however, was another matter. He had opened it repeatedly to eat and to drink, and had done so just that morning at his breakfast of scrambled eggs and suckling pig. Suddenly, the knight had an idea. Without stopping to say where he was going, he hurried to the blacksmith's shop, which was in the castle courtyard. The smith, a powerfully built man, was pulling a horseshoe into proper shape with his bare hands. "Smith," said the knight, "I have a problem." The smith replied, "I'm aware of your problem, sire. It's you being you." He often spoke in this manner to the knight, who usually enjoyed his philosophical quips. The knight glared at the smith. "I'm in no mood for your wisecracks. I'm stuck in this armor." He stamped his steel-clad foot to emphasize his point and inadvertently brought it down on the smith's big toe. Smith let out a howl of pain and, forgetting that the knight was his master, dealt him a smashing blow to the helmet. It didn't budge. "Try again," ordered the knight. He was completely unaware, as he was of most things, that the smith was acting in anger and not in a spirit of cooperation. "With pleasure," said the smith as he brought his axe down hard on the knight's helmet, hoping to split the steel and the knight's head in the bargain. But the axe did not even dent the metal. The knight felt a touch of panic. The smith was indeed the strongest man in the province. If he couldn't shuck him out of his armor, who could? The smith, an essentially kind man, except when his big toe was stamped on, sensed the knight's panic and grew sympathetic. "You have a tough plight, knight, but don't give up. Come back tomorrow after I'm rested. You caught me at the end of a hard day." That evening at dinner, the knight told Juliet that the blacksmith had tried to take off his armor but failed. "I don't believe you, you clanking clod," she screamed. If Juliet's reaction seemed a little harsh, you must realize that for years she had talked to a husband separated from her by his armor. Now, since his visor was stuck, she had to mash his food and push it through the holes, and it's very hard to mash lamb chops. The knight was frustrated that Juliet didn't believe he was really trying to get his armor off. He and the smith tried for days, but with no success. He grew more and more depressed. The knight had lived in his armor for so long, he had forgotten how everything felt without it. It took a tremendous blow on his helmeted head by the smith with an axe, or by Juliet with the nearest vase, before he noticed even a twinge of pain. And since he had difficulty feeling his own pain, the pain of others went unnoticed as well. However, the knight did feel sorry for himself. Carrying around that heavy armor all the time made him very tired. He couldn't even scratch his back if it itched, and he was getting pretty fed up with eating mashed food pushed through his visor. On top of that, he was sick at heart because Juliet didn't love him anymore. Now, instead of pushing the food through his visor, she began throwing it at him. Getting very little nourishment from this hit-or-miss feeding, he became weaker and weaker. The knight feared he would die if he didn't leave. He would miss Juliet, Christopher, and his classy castle, but he recognized that he wasn't much good to them, clanking around and wallowing in self-pity. The best thing for everyone, he decided, was for him to go. Juliet could find love with another knight, one who had removable armor and wouldn't clink in bed. The thought saddened him. Nevertheless, he had to find a way to free himself. On his way out of the province, the knight decided to stop in and say goodbye to the king, who had been very good to him. The king lived in a grand castle atop a hill in the high-rent district. As the knight rode across the drawbridge and into the courtyard, he met Gladbag, the court jester. "Hi, Gladdy," said the knight. "I came to say goodbye to the king." Gladbad looked up at him and said, "The king has up and gone away. To you, there's nothing he can say." "Where is he gone?" asked the knight. "I want to bid him farewell before I leave." Gladbag replied, "He is off on a crusade. If you wait, you'll be delayed." The knight was deeply disappointed to have missed the king. "Oh," he said to Gladbag sadly, "I could starve to death in this armor by the time the king returns. I might never see him again." He slumped dejectedly in his saddle. Then Gladbag said, "Well, aren't you a silly sight? All your might can't solve your plight." "I won't put up with your insulting rhymes," said the knight crossly, sitting up again. "Can't you take someone's problem seriously for once?" In a clear, lyrical voice, Gladbag sang, "No more can problems set me a-rockin'. Problems are just opportunities a-knockin'." "You'd sing a different tune if you were stuck in here," said the knight, even more crossly. Retorted Gladbag, "We all have armor of a kind. Yours is just easier to find." "There's no time to stay and listen to your nonsense. I must search for a way to get out of this armor." And with this, the knight kneed his mount forward. Gladbag called after him, "I know a man who can help you, knight, to get your real self in full sight." The knight pulled his horse to a stop and turned back to Gladbag. Excitedly he asked, "You know a man who can get me out of this armor? Who is he?" "Merlin the magician is his name. After meeting him, you'll not be the same." "Merlin?" questioned the knight. "The only Merlin I've ever heard of was the great and wise teacher of King Arthur." "Yes, yes, that's his claim to fame. This Merlin I know is one and the same." "But it can't be," said the knight. "Merlin and Arthur lived long, long ago." Gladbag replied, "'Tis true, yet he's alive and well. In yonder woods the sage doth dwell." "But those woods are so big," said the knight. "How will I find him?" Gladbag smiled. "One never knows, be it days, weeks, or years. When the pupil is ready, the teacher appears." This was the knight's first spark of hope. He reached out and shook Gladbag's hand in thanks, nearly crushing the jester's fingers with his gauntlets. Gladbag yelped in pain. The knight quickly released his hand. "Sorry," said the knight. Gladbag rubbed his bruised fingers. "When the armor is gone from you, you'll feel the pain of others, too." "I'll do my best, Gladdy," said the knight. He wheeled his horse around and, with new hope in his heart, rode away to find Merlin the magician. Do you want to hear chapter 2? Stay tuned and I'll share it with you.